Okay, so welcome back. All of these familiar names, some also faces. I could recognize you from your pictures. It's great to be here again, and it's great that you're here with us. I was just talking to Karen about how we see how many of you are really interested in learning and bringing more knowledge into Ethiopia and working with the autism community. And it's very exciting for us. And we're here to help this dream come true. As I said, and I'll keep saying, this community building, I think, is a very needed and a basic, I'll say, stone in the building that we're trying to build all together here. And I hope that it will keep furbishing and growing and developing. We have a lot of dreams and plans. Some of you have spoken to through email or LinkedIn in the past weeks. And I'm very, very excited for this. I want to remind you all that this is being recorded and put up to our YouTube channel, which I wrote to you all, has got over 60 likes. Sorry, not likes, the views over the past week. And just the video I put up yesterday already passed the 20 people, which is very exciting because I assume most of those people are people that aren't watching it live, meaning that there are more people here with us and that are interested. That's very exciting to us to know about you. So if you watch us on YouTube, so please let us know as well what you think. You're welcome to comment or give us a like. I want to remind you as well that you're welcome to open your videos since now we're getting to know each other. We would love to see your faces, but I also understand and respect your privacy if you don't want to. You're welcome to use the chat box over the presentation to ask questions or comments. We're here together to hear what you have to say. And of course, this is something I'll keep telling you about is our feedback questionnaire, which I will post. Thank you for those who keep answering every week. And I hope we'll get more answers this week. And without further ado, Karen, passing the mic to you. You have a lot to say, like every week, and we're waiting to hear and learn. So thank you very, very much.
Wonderful, wonderful to be here again. And I am going to just go ahead and get started. Today, our topic was speech sound disorders. And I'll just make a comment that while we have been targeting our kids with autism, speech sound disorders are not specific to autism. So this is going to be more broad. There's a lot of reasons why we have speech sound disorders. So I just wanted to make sure that we understand that autism does not cause speech sound disorders. So I am going to go ahead and share my presentation here. All right, so we're going to be talking about speech sound disorders in children and then go into some strategies that we're going to be able to use to help improve intelligibility. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at speech sound disorders and define them. We're going to look at what are some of the common causes and what are some characteristics that you see. We're going to specifically target looking at the difference between articulation and phonological disorders. And then we're going to have many strategies that can be used to improve speech intelligibility. I tried to load us up on a whole bunch of things we could do. All right, so speech sound disorders, it's pretty basic. We can think this is when our kids are having difficulty producing speech sounds correctly or fluently. So we have a very difficult time understanding some of them, or at least some of our words. So there's two main types that we're going to be looking at today, and this is the articulation and phonological disorders. And so we're going to look at what the difference is between those. So I wanted to point out with speech sound development has an orderly by age sound development. So of course, I'm familiar with what is most common in English. I didn't see a lot of research. I think that's an area that will be coming for specific to Amharic or other languages. But just in general, I just want to make sure you're aware that children produce speech sounds in a predictable sequence as they grow. And they're going to start with simpler sounds and progress to more complex ones. So you can see the picture at the bottom here. This is kind of a typical one with English. We have younger ones. We have certain sounds like P, B, TMN, those kinds of sounds that we're going to see at the younger ages, and then there's other ones that come in. So I will say that when I'm in the school system here that I'm working in, there's kids that might come in with certain sound errors and they might be considered older sounds. And what I just tell the parents is that's okay. That's still considered developmental. Just like we have children that walk at different ages. I had one of my children that was a very early walker at like 8.5 months, and then one of my other children that didn't walk till 13 months. So just like there's a range in that, there's also a range in our speech sound. So I'm not expecting a younger child, and I'm not worried about a younger child that's having some speech sound errors. It's more if the younger children are highly unintelligible. So when we're looking at speech sound disorders and the importance of it, we know that this impacts a child's ability to speak clearly and to have conversation and people understand them, but it also can have difficulties with their learning. I have kids that, as they're trying to learn to read or they're writing, they might be writing the way they produce a word, and so they're putting in the wrong speech sound. We get kids that get really frustrated, especially when they're trying to repeat themselves over and over again, and people aren't understanding them. It may make them have a harder time getting playing with friends because their friends aren't able to understand what they're saying. And we get these kids that are frustrated. They may be withdrawn. Even kids that they don't want to speak as much because they know that people have a difficult time understanding them. So we want to make sure that we understand that the earlier we can support any of these kids, the better the outcomes are. All right, when we're looking at why we have speech sound disorders, there is just a ton of reasons why. So it could be a hearing loss. I have kids that might have been born with some sort of hearing loss, therefore they're not hearing the speech sound input. I have other kids that have a lot of hearing, like ear infections, and those kids with ear infections, with the fluid in their ears, it's blocking them hearing all the speech sound correctly. So that can be common. There's some different neurological conditions that have to do with motor planning, in the motor aspect. There might be structural issues. Could be some of our kids that end up with something like cleft palate. Maybe there's some sort of injury. Maybe there's just a birth defect, but those can cause some of our speech sounds to be difficult. Some of our kids just generally have developmental delay. And these are kids that here in the school system here where I work, in our state, we kind of have the age 8 as the catch-up year, 8 years old. So they could be considered developmental delayed and still trying to catch up. Once they get past age 8, and they still haven't maybe caught up in general, then we know it's more than a developmental delay, and we'll give them a different category as we're putting them into services. And then one other cause could just simply be that there's limited exposure to speech models. I've worked with some families in a like it was a birth through 3 intervention program. And these were parents that didn't have a lot of information and on basically how to be a parent and what to do with their child. And so they weren't speaking to them very much and they just weren't providing a lot of input. And so some of these kids then had delays in not only in their speech, but their language. So this was this is a really good graphic. This is actually on the ASHA. I'm certified with ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And ASHA has a wonderful website full of resources. But I really like this graphic. It kind of breaks down the speech sound disorders into functional and organic. And so a lot of the things I just mentioned were in that organic area between the motor. There's a couple things that have to do with executing or even planning in the brain, some of that structural or that sensory, like the hearing. But today, what we're going to be targeting is this functional. And you'll see on there that it says no known cause. So with this, we don't have a specific reason why these kids are having a speech sound disorder. And the reason really doesn't matter. What I do is I just treat whatever I see. Okay, and you'll see there it lists this, what I mentioned before was the articulation and phonology. So we're going to look at exactly what those mean. So just in general, like an overview, the key difference is articulation is more just a motor production. Phonological is a rule-based system. And so it's not necessarily tied to a specific sound. So an example would be with articulation, there might be a specific sound they have a hard time saying. I was just with a preschooler this morning, and when he was trying to say the word fish, he was putting a P in there and saying pish. So he had a difficult time with all words with F. Phonological is, like I said, is the rule system. So an example of that would be they're replacing all of the sounds made in the back of the mouth with sounds in the front. So it wasn't tied to a specific sound. Their brain is just has mixed up some of the language rules of how we produce those sounds. All right, so looking a little bit more at articulation disorders. So this is where we're going to have kids with difficulty producing the specific speech sounds. And you might see this in some different ways. So these are just a few examples. So sometimes I have kids that substitute a sound, just like that example I gave you. The child was putting a P in for the F when he was trying to say fish. They might omit or they may just delete the sound. I've had kids that they have such a difficult time saying it. They just know and they just don't even produce the sound. Sometimes I get where the kids are saying the sound, but it doesn't sound quite as clear as it should. And so we call that a distortion. So it's like, okay, they're getting it a little bit, but it still needs some work. And then another example would be addition. So I've got sometimes where we're adding sounds to words that shouldn't be there. So then that phonological that we were talking about, where it's based on those language rules, I'm going to give you just a few examples. But there's a lot of them. And there might be differences, obviously, between languages. But one example would be one thing we call is weak syllable deletion. So generally, when we say a word, there's going to be a syllable that's stressed more. So this is just an example of they're deleting the syllables that are unstressed. So examples would be instead of saying banana, they're just saying nana. So in the word banana, we're emphasizing the middle syllable, and that would be the stressed one. So they would be deleting it. Another example would be instead of potato, they just say tato. So they're just deleting part of the syllable. So another one that's really common, especially with my younger kids, I have a lot of my 4-year-olds that I work with, would be something called fronting. And that's where we take the sounds that are supposed to be in the back of the mouth, like a K, 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 or a G, 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 and we're switching it to the front. So often I might hear the word like cat, they switch it to a T. And they might say tat. Or good, they're going to switch that G to a D and say dud. So if you said both of those, you would feel cat, the K in the back, tat, it goes in the front. And then another one would be called stopping. So some of our sounds have airflow, like that would be like an F or an S. So we say a F or a S. So that airflow should be coming out. But some kids, every time there's a sound, or at least a lot of the sounds with some sort of airflow, is they're switching it and they might be producing something that stops, no airflow. So that's why it's called stopping. So that might be an example of saying ton for sun. So they put that T in there, or pin for fin, which is, or like the child I had today, saying pish for fish. And then another example of a phonological disorder is using final consonant deletion. So especially some of my kids that are highly unintelligible and have numerous speech sound errors, this can be really common. And they're deleting sounds at the ends of the word, and they're really only saying the beginning sound. I might see them deleting some of the other syllables. Maybe they're just saying the beginning syllable. And so we're really having to target not a specific speech sound. So I'm not targeting the P or targeting the G. We're more thinking getting the end sound on all of our words. So again, it's that whole rule of when we say a word, there's a sound at the end. Now, obviously, some of our many words end in vowels, so those wouldn't have a consonant at the end. But so those are a few of the common ones I see, but there are quite a few others. So this, again, I like this visual that just shows the differences. And the blue with our articulation, it's that speech sound production. They have errors pronouncing it. It's going to be individual sounds. It could be one sound, it could be five sounds. And it's that motor skill, and they need some cues to help figure out how to say it correctly. And an example is just in one sound. And then that phonological is those speech sound patterns and the rules governing how they produce it and just difficulty with those sound patterns. And it's not necessarily motor related. So it's not that they can't motor produce it. It's more brain related of I'm not getting that rule. So when we're looking at kids and when we're seeking help for them, definitely when speech is unclear after age 4. We know, again, there's speak kids with, I told you developmentally, we know there's going to be speech sound errors. And so I typically see a lot of kids placed in speech therapy in that 3.5, 4, when I'm working with them. And if a parent has a child that's highly unintelligible, especially maybe I've had a child before that isn't producing almost any consonants, they're almost only talking in vowels, or they have so many phonological of these rule-based they're so highly unintelligible. I will see a child and work with them at those younger ages. So sometimes it's also when to seek help is I've done some practice, maybe the parents practiced and I'm not seeing any progress. When they're seeing progress with that, that's great. Also, when our children are becoming frustrated and they're just avoiding speaking and they won't answer you because they're just so frustrated. So we don't want our children to be frustrated. And then there's other concerns, if we've got kids that are also having learning difficulties, again, I gave the example of their writing sounds and they're having a difficult time understanding reading and learning sounds to sound out words, or if there's some hearing issues, especially if I have had a younger child and they've already been diagnosed with some sort of hearing loss, then we're going to start supporting them right away because we want them to continue to develop and grow and not have multiple years of hearing things incorrectly. All right, so I wanted to give some basic information of how we're assessing this. So when we're looking at a child, so I'm going to show you several things that can be involved. All of these things don't have to be involved. Sometimes I do 2 or 3 of these. It kind of depends on the child. And I am going to I'm working on a number of documents that you guys are going to be able to have. And in that, there's some information about assessment and even kind of a little flow chart where you can answer yes, no questions for what is my next steps. So I'm trying to get you guys some things that would be really helpful and practical and you could apply right away. So when I'm assessing kids with any type of speech sound, I always do a speech sample. So this is when during natural speech. So especially if it's a new child, I might just have toys or I might go into their classroom and we just play. And I take notes about what they're saying and I'm listening for what they're saying in this natural context. So um, if it's an older child, it might just be conversation. I've taken some of my kids that can talk, and maybe we just talk about things, what they like to do, what did they do this weekend? We talk about some of their favorites, and I get them to just have conversation with me, and I can see how they're speaking in conversation. Because sometimes it's very different in a conversational, natural setting than just saying a single word. So we want to look at where they're having problems. So I'll record this down, I'll make notes and circle letters and make notes about what they replaced them with. And then I'm also kind of keeping my eye out for any of those patterns. Do I see them deleting those N sounds or do I see them taking 3-syllable words and changing them to 2-syllable words? So then there's also some picture naming tasks. So this would just be using familiar pictures. So household items, animals, and food. There are a lot of out there. These are in English, and they're just created by speech therapists. So they're not anything like a standardized full assessment, but they're screenings used to be able to assess. And I'm going to show you an example of one. And again, it's something that one, I would love to work with some people to let's create one that would be have some familiar pictures. And then we also want to be looking at a range of speech sounds. We want to be hitting a variety of the sounds, but we also want to be hitting in the different positions of words. So I don't want to just hear that my child can say an F, like in fish, at the beginning of the word. I want to hear that they can say it in the middle and at the end. So I'm also checking for that. Where in the word are they having errors? And again, when we're naming pictures, I'm keeping track of all this. Are they substituting? Are they deleting? Are they distorting? Did I hear them say, an S, but it sounded just a little off? It wasn't quite clear. And so then those are word level tasks when I'm just having them rate pictures. So I also want to make sure I'm hearing them say sentences. So it could be that it's a child that they might repeat a single word or a phrase or a sentence after you or after me. And or I could create after they say a word, I might have them make a sentence. So I have some kids that, I might just ask them a question about, but I'm trying to get hear them at that sentence level. And then I'm choosing again different word targets, just same thing as when we were just talking about naming the picture cards. I want to hear different consonants, different vowels, if there's sounds blends together, if there's different syllables. And then this is really going to help give me a good picture. I'm going to be able to see how did they do in their single words. I'm going to see how did they do in sentences. And then if I've done that speech sample where I've had some just either conversation or been in a natural environment and playing with some toys, then I can hear how their spontaneous speech. So those are three different areas that I would be looking at. So it's also important too that I do parent and teacher interviews. I'll check with them and ask, how easily understood is your child by their family, and any friends? Because a lot of times we know parents can understand them. They're used to their speaking, but when I ask, well, when your family comes over that doesn't see them maybe as often, do you constantly have to tell them what your child is saying? And then I might even ask them, do you know of any sounds they struggle on? Because they might be able to be like, give me words. Like every time they say this, they're putting this sound in there. So some people might be aware. And then I might just also check in on, has there been any change over time? Have they seen it progressively get worse, or have they maybe seen some of it getting better? And then I'll also just do some observations. A lot of times I do this in conjunction with the speech sample, but if they're playing with some kids, if they got some toys, or if they're participating in a lesson where the teacher might be asking them questions, I'll just see where this gives me information about impact. Like the teacher was asking a question, but the teacher had to repeat them 3 times, and the teacher never ever understood what the child was saying. And so then I'm seeing how it's impacting them in addition to I just didn't understand the child. And I try to make sure to keep a nice list or an inventory of the sounds. So usually when I've done some sort of screening or even it is some sort of formal assessment, I have a kind of a list at the bottom. I've checked how they could say each sound, whether it be in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And I have a nice concrete inventory where I can see exactly what sounds we have an error and if they're at did things get worse from words to sentences to conversation? And then I kind of go back through and look at that error pattern analysis. So that's where I can look and see, oh, they were deleting the end sounds. This is where I'm looking for some of those phonological rules. Or are they doing the stopping where any sound that should have airflow, they're not producing the air? One other one too that I didn't put on there is even, it's called devoicing, and it's our sounds like if you would say like a Z like Z with our voice on, and they change it to an S. And so my kids always will touch our throats and I'll say, turn your voice on, turn it off. So they're getting that cue. But so that's another one that I see a lot of. So I did, I'm actually going to stop sharing this so I can show you something. This is an example of of a good, I actually have it in my classroom right now. It's a speech screening. It's one that you can kind of use as example. And let me just um, go over to show you this one real quick. All right, so this one is, again, it's an articulation or a speech sound screener. There's actually a great website, and you're going to have this information at the end of the slideshow with the links. So she also has some free speech sound materials. And again, some of these you might want to use them in English, but it also might give you good examples for what I can do because I'm often creating my own therapy meals materials. While I do have things that I've purchased, sometimes I want more, for instance, more of a particular sound, and so I print out pictures. I laminate them. If you don't have lamination, I've used packing tape. I've put them on a ring, and then we have more. But so this screener. First, I'm going to show you the pictures at the bottom. So there's pictures like this that are used. The kids, there's two
Karen,
pages. Yeah.
we only see you now, so I don't know.
Oh, oh, okay. Hold on one second. I clicked stop sharing. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. Let me reshare. All right, let's try it again. All right, so there you go. You can see that now?
Yes, now we can see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is on that Mommy Speech. Again, mommyspeechtherapy.com that you're going to have this resource at the end. And so there's two pages of pictures. So you see they're just simple, basic pictures of things that the child probably, hopefully knows, but if not, we can tell them. And so what they've done then is they've taken all of this and they've taken certain words and you see um, put they've put it red or blue. Those are the sounds they're targeting. So when the child's saying piano, that picture they're targeting, I'm listening for the P and I'm listening for the N. Then when they go to apple, I'm just listening for the P. When they go to mop, it's both sounds. But you see, for each of these sounds, we've checked beginning, middle, end, beginning, middle, end. Um, so by the time you get done with this, when you've chosen three pictures or so for each of the sounds, then you have a nice inventory that you can create with um, your speech sound errors. But there's a lot of free ones out there that kind of have a similar look to this, where they've just taken some pictures and they just have something where they already have it written down so they can keep track of it.
Karen, I want to stop you. There's a
Yeah.
question here. George has been waiting politely. He asked, when should we use Kaufman and EESA or Early Echoic Skills Assessment?
So again, when you're working on the assessment portion, any piece that you have, those can all be part of the assessment. The assessment time is when we're trying to just gain that information about what are the speech sounds, whether it's an articulation or a specific motor, or when it's a phonological. So there's a lot of different tools out there that can be used. And again, I'm showing some things too that because not everybody might have some sort of standardized test. I have several others again that I flip through the pictures. They do have some sort of standardization. I can get some age equivalencies, um, but some of that's based on English age equivalencies, so those aren't going to be as appropriate. So basically in the assessment process, any tools that you can use to bring together all the sounds and create an inventory and get a full picture are going to be great tools to use. So I'm just pointing out, obviously I've shared, some things are in English. There's, we don't have as much information yet on speech sound development. I see that coming. That would be a great. I did find a little information yesterday when I was looking. Um, and so again, we want to know that at some point because that'll help us decide if we're going to help a 4-year-old or if we're going to be able to tell the parent it's okay that they're making these 2 or 3 speech sound errors. They're only 3 or 4, but if we're going to keep an eye on them and if they're still making those errors in a couple years, then we would track them. But since we don't have that information, it's it's never going to hurt a child to work on speech sound errors because again, we don't fully have all that information on what are considered developmental. And then of course, assessment tools, there's not standardized assessment tools in the different languages. But again, that's why I was showing you some examples of things that people just created themselves. And these weren't things that were for sale. This is of someone that she created this to be helpful and then just put it out for anybody to use for free. And so um, all right, so we're going to move off assessment. So you can be thinking about just with information I presented on assessment and be thinking about other questions that you might have or specific questions about how you can do things. Again, I'm going to try to be over this next time period, being able to give you a lot of documents that you'll be able to use. I tried to have them ready. It was just kind of ran out of time, but so we'll hopefully in the next couple weeks, we'll get some of those out. So we're going to kind of switch over now to treatment because I know that's where people want to know how do I fix this or what can I do? So key principles, we need to practice frequently and consistently. So if I see a child for speech therapy, for instance, in the school system, they might have the luxury of getting to work with me once or twice a week. But a child is going to make much more progress when I send home practice activities at home for the parent to then also practice 3 different times a week. And when I communicate with the classroom teacher and say, hey, we're working on this right now, and I let them know what they can do. So if there's any cues I'm giving them and say, they can produce this now if you do this. So then that classroom teacher is also on board and practicing with them. So definitely frequent practice. Doesn't have to be long periods, can be short. And we're going to use simple, familiar words to the kids. We're going to make it fun and engaging. At our last one, when we were talking about receptive and expressive language, we had a lot of talk about how important play therapy is. And it's the same thing with our speech sounds. If our kids are bored and not interested in just sitting at a table and doing drill and practice saying sounds, we need to make it fun and engaging for them to enjoy. And then again, involving as many people as possible. Families, I've had kids that had older siblings and brothers and sisters, and they were really on board, some of them, with practicing with them, and they were excited to tell me when they were able to practice some of the activities I sent. So just like receptive and expressive language and augmentative communication, there's a lot of research-based interventions. So there's a lot of research-based interventions also for speech sounds. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, what's been found to be effective. And again, there's a lot of different things you can do. So this is, the first thing we're going to talk about is what would be considered the traditional speech sound therapy. And it was developed by someone named Charles Van Riper. And so this one kind of has a few different stages. And so the first one is just discrimination training. Like, can I even tell the difference between these sounds? I have, children that they don't even realize they're producing sounds incorrectly. So some kids I have to back all the way up to, are we even distinguishing the difference? I also will check on their stimulability, which means can I get them to produce the sound quickly or easily? A lot of times I use this if a child has 4 or 5 speech sound disorders, I'll use their stimulability. If 2 or 3 of those sounds I can get them to say pretty quickly, I might focus on those first and save the other ones. So then the procedure of sound stabilization, where we're going to look a little bit more about that on the next slide, but that's just getting them to consistently be able to produce sounds at different levels. My office always goes dark when I don't move. It's got these lightsaber lights on him. And then after we've got that sound stabilized, we want them to be able to generalize it. So if they're just doing some practice times, I want them to take it out of practice, and I want them to be able to use that with other people and not just me. And then maintaining that. I want to make sure that over time they didn't regress and go back to using their speech in ways that were in error. So when we're doing this sound, so this is, we're going to look at that. What is that sound stabilization part, what we looked at? Okay, so when we're looking at this, there's kind of a hierarchy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through a step-by-step progression. This helps build confidence and accuracy. So the kids get that feeling of success, especially for a child that's had numerous speech sound errors and gets frustrated. They start to feel some confidence and they feel good about themselves. And they hear someone saying that they're doing a great job. And so I give a lot of positive feedback when we're in speech therapy. And then again, we're working to build that accuracy. So you can see the diagram on here. And again, we talked about that discrimination, being able to hear sounds. A lot of kids, I'm able to just jump up into that isolation, and I check to see, can they even say that sound? If I even give them some quick cues, that's where I'm checking that stimulability. So there's some kids that we have to try several different ways. There's not kind of a one size fits all for what works for kids to get them to motorically produce a sound. So there's some little tips and cues and things I try, some that are more successful. But once I'm able to get a child to produce a sound, if they weren't able to say it at all, then I'm going to move into syllables. So if I have that child, the one I was observing, he's actually one of my speech therapy kids, and we're working on F for fish. We're first just wanting to get that sound. Like, so we're going to talk about, give him cues for what he's supposed to do with his teeth and his air. But once we're able to say that, we're going to move to some syllables. I'm going to put some different vowels in there. So I might have that sound, and we might be looking at fa, fo, fee, some different vowels in there. Sometimes when I'm doing this, I find, and this has to do with where the vowels are produced. And so sometimes the match between what sound they're saying and what vowel they're making, it can actually be easier or harder to say. So if I'm doing at this initial stage, and as I'm doing some of this practice, if I see that they're able to say it with 3 vowel sounds, but then there's 3 that are more difficult, I don't worry about those 3 at first. Because again, I'm trying to build some new motor muscle memory pathways for this child. So I'm going to go with what's successful. And if that just means certain vowels, then that's okay. And once we're really successful with that, then we're going to work on adding some of these others. So from syllables, we move up to words. I'll use short words. We move up to phrases. We might add it to 2 words, then to sentences. For any of our kids that are reading is actually a good step between I can produce a sentence to full-on conversation. Because when a child is reading, they're actually concentrating more on what they're reading, so they're not really focused as much on their speech. So it kind of is a great one. And the last step in this kind of hierarchy is I'm generalized it. No matter where I go, I am producing these speech sounds. So I give this visual to parents and teachers a lot of a speech sound ladder. So again, it kind of is what we just talked about, that sounds alone, syllables, words, phrases, sentences, multiple sentences, and then it's in their automatic speech. So I say, so for parents that are concerned about their conversation, I'm going to say, you know what, actually not really concerned about their conversation right now, because we're working on words right now. We're working on syllables. So that's where we're going to be focused right now. So when we're doing these, to determine like when are we moving to the next level? So I'm always generally aiming for 80% accuracy. So when our kids are getting 80% accuracy, whether it be I've got those syllables that they're producing with all the different vowels, and they might have had 50%, then eventually it's 60, 70, 80. Once they kind of get to that 80 consistently, then I'm going to move on to that next stage. So again, this is allowing them to reinforce any motor patterns. They're used to saying it. They might have for 3 years been, or 4 years, been saying it a certain way. So they have some motor pathways that are very firmly developed, and we're just trying to break that and switch that. So it's going to give us a really good foundation when they're getting that 80% accuracy. It's very strong. And what research has shown is that once a child gets to about 75% accuracy, they're going to keep making progress. So I might, for instance, exit a child from all speech therapy when all of their sounds are at 80% accuracy. They're not 100%, which is where I want them to be. But again, what research has shown is once they kind of get to that 75, they're going to keep making progress. They've learned enough of that motor that without speech therapy and without support, they're going to keep making progress. So I usually um, so 80% is typically when other speech therapists, I've even had some that like to go for 85%, just to make sure it's really ingrained into them. And
Karen, I have a question. Maybe I missed
sure.
it. I wanted to know, how do you monitor the accuracy?
So I have, I'm going to give you guys a couple, that's one thing I'm going to send you is a couple of examples of some data sheets. Now, I know so many speech therapists, and probably every speech therapist I know uses a different data sheet. So for example, when I'm have a child that I'm working with, we might come in and even just practice some things. I don't keep data on every word they say with me. I often choose about 20. So, and I just kind of have some tally marks. I'll put, they got one, they missed one, they got one, they missed one. And at the end of my session, I can calculate a percentage of accuracy. I might even have something on there. So I've even had some of my older kids that they love to chart that. So I've had some visuals where at the end of the speech, I calculate it. And again, this is someone who's sometimes again, my older children, maybe if I've had someone in like, that's 8 or 9 or 10, and they are working for that goal of 80%. And so they get excited to visually see, and they like to color in the bar graph. Um, so again, I'll give you some examples of some data sheets. And usually what they look like is I have my child's name. I have whatever goals they're working on. So goal one might be that F sound in the beginning, middle, and end of words. I'm working to get it in all positions, just word level. Maybe this child can't say anything at all, so I'm not even worried about sentences right now. Maybe the next goal is an S sound. Or maybe another goal would be getting the sounds at the end of words, one of those phonological processes. So then I've got those labeled 1, 2, 3 at the beginning of my data sheet. And so if I was working with a child today, I might say, oh, I worked on goals 1 and 2, and I could keep some data. You don't even have to keep data every session. So if you're going to work with a child more than once in a week, again, you're just trying to chart some progress. So it doesn't have to be, again, I usually do, it's just such a habit with me. Everything I do is data driven. So if I have a child that's not making progress, that's going to change what I do. If I have a child that's making speedy progress. So data is really important. To keep track and have something. Parents also like to see. Parents get excited when I send a note home and say, hey, your child is now able to say their beginning sounds at the word level with 80% accuracy. We're moving to phrases. So parents like to hear that, all that positive praise. So when I'm working with a child, I'm trying to aim for at least 50 targets, meaning they're saying whatever I'm practicing at least 50 times. Does that always happen, especially with the younger children? No, but that's kind of what I go for. And if it's possible, even 100. So this gives me the chance to help reinforce correct sounds. So if they're producing it, then I can make some comments. If it was a child, for instance, working on an M, and I could say, and maybe I have one child right now that he has a difficult time with his M, and he doesn't pronounce it, and his mouth is open. So I might, if I hear him saying his M correctly, 2 or 3 times in a row, then I'm going to be able to give feedback of, good job. You put your lips together and you made that M sound. And then if it's incorrect at the level they're at, I'm then going to give some feedback. Maybe he didn't put his lips together, and I'm just going to give him a cue. Oh, try it again with your lips together. Maybe he's able to repeat it. Maybe I need to give him more cues. We're gonna talk about a little bit about the cueing process and how that is helpful. And then when we're getting a lot of targets in a time, it's just going to help make success, help them to be able to generalize any new speech sound skills they're learning. So when I was talking about cues, so here's kind of a continuum of from the top is the most cueing to the bottom is the least cueing. And so even at a certain level, so let's say I'm working with a child with a sound at the word level. Maybe we're trying to get the end sounds in the word. So maybe at the beginning, I'm having to do several things. Maybe I'm having to give him some sort of physical cue, depending on what the sound is. I might give him a verbal cue. Remember, it's with our K, we put it in the back of their mouth. And I've given them some examples. And then we're going to say it together. Okay, let's try it again. Sometimes I'm really emphasizing that sound. If it's my M sound and my word is a mouse, I might be emphasizing mouse. I even drag it out, like, because we're giving a lot of emphasis to try to say, think about it. We're doing it this way. So there's also times that I've pulled back and I just whisper it. I say it quietly. Maybe we're saying a word together, and again, I'm not saying it quite as loud. There's been other times where I've just mouthed the word or again given a cue with them, but I don't say any sound. Um, I have kids that, again, are imitating me. Sometimes I just give them occasional cues. I might every once in a while need to say, hey, now remember today we're using a lot of key times with an F sound, like fish. We use a cue of bite your lip. They're not really biting the lip, but they might have a mirror. They know to put their teeth on their lip. And so I might give them that cue at the beginning. Hey, we're going to work on our F sound. Remember, this is the one where we bite our lip, we push the air out. So I'm going to be watching for that. I might, and then if they don't do that, then I might give them a model. But I try to pull back on the models. I don't want the kids repeating after me everything they do. So if I had some actual speech sound therapy cards where we're doing some of the activities I'm going to be showing you, maybe at first I'm saying, for M words, mouth, muffin, man, and then they're copying me. Eventually, I want to get to where I don't say anything. I don't give them any cue. I don't give them any, pointing or anything. And we're just able to say these pictures without anything. So when I'm saying 80% accuracy, I want 80% accuracy without any cues. I want 80% accuracy when they're just able to look at a picture or an object and say that sound accurately. But a lot of my kids, they need a progression of lots of cues at first and reminders or visuals to slowly reducing those. So I document that on my data. So if I have a student that I'll note and I'll say, verbal cue, bite your lip and blow air. So I'll remember and I'll see that on my data. And then if I didn't need to do it after 3 times, then I'll also note only imitation. And then eventually I'll say independently naming. And then I know, okay, we're independently naming. Now we're good to move to the next level. All right, so we're just going to kind of look at some other things that we can do in speech therapy. And you're also going to see some activities where I try to put pictures and examples. And again, a lot of these are things that I've used therapy materials I've created. So I didn't necessarily even have to buy something. So the first one is auditory bombardment. And when we were talking about that traditional speech therapy, sometimes I've started out a session for our kids that I'm just trying to even help them with discrimination, or it's just a way to start to remind them of what we're doing. I'm going to say several words. So if it's a child I'm working with B, I'm maybe going to say, okay, remember today we're going to work on our B sound, We're going to do that at the beginning of words. And I'm like, all right, let me say a few of those for us. Let's listen. And I kind of cue them in to listen. And then I'll say those boots, bath. And I'm providing them a really good model of what to do. I can emphasize it, so we can start off with just them listening. I can also do this not just with picture cards. Um, if a child has stories or books or even some songs that have any of those sounds, I might read them that story first. And in there, we're going to comment about all those B words. I've even taken picture cards like that example up there, and I've made a story using those because I didn't have a story with picture cards, and I've just kind of cut them and glued them and either typed some sort of words. Sometimes we've even had um, like a fun one I've done, like if you're looking at those pictures, it may be that on every page, and we're using black and white because I'm not printing all this out in color for the kids when I'm letting them create it and take it home, is I might go ahead and have a picture of a bus on every page in this little book. Maybe I've just taken a piece of paper or cut it into four pieces, stapled into the side to make a little book. And so maybe there's a bus on each page, and we're going to take one of the other B pictures and we're going to glue it on top of the bus. So the next one might be the boots are on the bus. Then the next one, I'll let them take their bird and put it on the bus. The bird is on the bus. Sometimes I'm using this to intermix with my language kids. And so we might be actually doing some other things. Put it on the bus, put it in front of the bus, put it next to the bus. So when I can find activities that I can uh, do two things with, then that's wonderful. And so, but during this auditory bombardment, I'm not asking the kids to say anything. I'm just letting them listen. So one other thing that I find helpful with some kids, and again, some of these I can try things with kids, and if it's not helpful, I move on. So you're not going to find the same success with every child and with every speech sound. So this next one is called minimal pairs. And what this is it has words that just one sound is changed. So this would be an activity that I would use for some of my kids. For instance, I told you we know the k sound is produced in the back of our throat, but they're switching it to the front and they're saying the t sound. So, but there's changing the word. So this pair, putting them together, we've got T and key. So if they were to look at that first one and call it key, then there wouldn't be any different. Sometimes I've even recorded them and I've let them judge themselves. So I've used my phone before if I had and said, okay, let's say the first word T and let's say the second word key. And then I'd let them say, what do you think? How do you, did we put our sound in the back on that one? So again, this can sometimes help with that. I do have some kids though, if they're earlier, they're not ready for minimal pairs, and having too many things with T's and K's together, I have to separate out that we're not ready for that. So usually when I'm doing this, they've had a little practice already. So I've used pictures, I've used objects, I've used photographs of things. So whatever's most motivating and whatever works well. So another thing that's important is those visual cues. So we were talking earlier about cues. Those were a lot of auditory cues where I was giving them examples of things they might need to, where they need to put their teeth, and would be, but having a mirror there while we're giving these cues is going to be helpful to them. So a lot of times I tell parents, I have like two small mirrors that I have with me so that we can always look if it's a sound that's visual. And then I might tell parents, hey, I'm going to give you 5 or 10 words to practice and do them in front of the mirror when you get home. And the kids can show their parents in front of the mirror. But then we're watching the mouth move. We're modeling, nice and slow and clear. And then just there's other pictures I too have too of mouth pictures. But what I found, again, these mouth pictures might show the mouth open for a sound, but I find my kids do better instead of just the they're almost kind of like colored line drawing of mouth pictures. I find they do better with real things. Watch me and look in the mirror. So I don't tend to use those as much. So the other one would be some tactile cues, some sort of touching. I try not to do this because anytime I'm touching or moving something, that's like the one of the more restrictive things. But if I'm talking about voice sounds, like I said before, I might say, let's put our hand on our throat, and we might just even just do something first, like say ah, and I'll say, did you feel that? And they're like, they'll always be excited, like, oh, it was moving, and and then we'll talk about, okay, now let's say this. Sometimes I'd use, if I'm just trying to explain voice to unvoice, if we usually say shh for being quiet. So I'll say, let's say shh. And they'll be like, oh, the kids are like, it's not moving. And so then that kind of helps them understand. So then eventually when I'm giving them a cue of, oh, we need to put our voice on, especially like between K and G, the only difference is my voice is on or my voice is off. Sometimes I might tap my lips. Okay, let's, for M, B, and P, those are very visual sounds. So I can give a cue to tap the lips. Sometimes I don't even say anything, and they know, okay, this is that sound where I'm putting those together. There have been times that I've done some gentle physical prompts. I've done some things with tongue depressors. There was one child we were really struggling to get that k or that g sound. They were firmly just that motor memory of switching it to a T or D was so strong. I think we had tried everything, and so we actually would had like a tongue depressor, and I was kind of using that to push the tongue back, and then I was kind of holding it and then be like, okay, now let's say our k. So occasionally there could be some like, all right, we're going to squeeze them together, push your lips together. But again, if I don't have to do those physical prompts, I try not to because those are more restrictive. But sometimes in an initial teaching, it may be helpful. Okay, so another one would be syllable blending. So this would be especially helpful for either one, we're um, working on specific speech sounds that are just articulation errors, and I'm trying to put them together with another one, or I have that phonological where I'm deleting a symbol. So maybe we've worked on one, they know how to say ma, or they know how to say go, and so now I'm like, I'm going to add a syllable, mama. So I know they can say one, so hey, let's put them together. Or go, and let's add on goat or baby. Maybe they've just said bay, so let's do baby. So we've switched it to a functional word. Sometimes what you see is they could say bay and they could say bee, but when you put it together, they say it incorrectly. And some of this is because when we're saying like bay and bee, those are not speech sounds. They have no muscle memory pathway for that. But as soon as you say baby, instantly their brain remembers that and what they say it. So sometimes I like to use nonsense things that don't even make sense. So if I was trying to put baby together, I might just put it together with bay ba. So that's not a word, but again, I'm now putting two syllables together. And they don't have a muscle memory for that because that's not a vocabulary word. And so they don't say bay ba. So sometimes those nonsense things that don't even make sense. So a lot of times I tell them we're going to make silly words, we're going to make some funny words, and sometimes they laugh and they think that's funny when we make silly words. Another thing that can be helpful when we're doing that is using some sort of um, tactile cue where we clap or tap. So I do that a lot with my kids. We might add a tapping like mama or baby. Other times we might tap the table one at a time. We might be ma ma. And so I have a lot of kids that we've done this a few times, and they right away, even before I do it, they go to the tapping. So kids can really like adding that in, and that can be a really great cue. If I'm going to three syllable words, computer. Again, we might, okay, this one's going to be three taps, kids. Okay, we're going to go computer, and we tap that table three times or clap, whatever. All right, so now I'm going to show you a whole bunch of some fun play-based. So just like our play-based, when we were talking last week about the importance, particularly of kids with autism, but all children in general, is that it's also research-based for our speech sounds. So this is going to be using fun things like puppets and balls and pretend play, even practicing those target sounds while we're in a play context. And we're really trying to keep therapy fun and stress-free. The last thing we want to do is be sitting right next to a child and only be showing them picture cards and having them say picture cards. I would get bored with that. If I get bored with that, then the kids certainly are. And then they're not going to look forward to want to practice. So play-based can be especially helpful for those younger kids. So just a few ideas of some things I do. So one is called What's There? So I might take 5 different pictures and put them around the room. I might have set one, there's a trash can in my room right now, for instance. So I might set one by the trash can. I might set one on the chair. I might set one under a desk. So they're in different locations. And I might just ask the child and I'll say, find the one next to the trash can. And I'll say, so what's beside the trash can? And then they could go find it, pick it up and be like, oh, it's a bee. So this gives movement. Sometimes our younger kids, they need to move. Sitting at a table with you isn't any fun. So I might mix and match. I'm doing something at a table. Now we're going to get up and do something fun. And then maybe we're going to go back to the table. So you can notice, though, I'm going to point out that something like this is going to be bringing in some of those vocabulary concepts that a lot of our kids have a hard time with. So maybe I've specifically chosen that I'm only putting the cards on or under something. So we've just got 2 things, on or under. So while maybe I'm mostly targeting, I want to get these speech sound in, I'm also showing them on and under. So again, anytime I can pair these together for my kids that have multiple goals, I would rather not just have, if I was seeing a child twice, I would rather not just see them once to work on speech sounds and then once to work on language. I want to be doing it all together. So another one, a lot of my kids love cars, especially my younger boys. So we might just drive our cars over the cards. We make a road. Sometimes you can see on this picture here, there's even kind of a strip of a road. I've done that before where I took like a piece of black paper and put like a dotted line in the middle of the road to make it kind of look like a road. Other times we've just taken pictures and kind of lined them up. And then as we drive our car over those, and again, we're having fun. I let the kids pick their color, and then I'm like, all right, let's rev our engine. Boom, boom, boom. We have fun, and then we start driving them over. Okay, let's drive it over the first one. Oh, stop. We always kind of practice. Oh, we have to stop when we get a picture. And then we ask what it is. It's a lamp. For some of my kids, if they're not at the word level with just lamp, I might then be expecting them to say a sentence or a phrase. Maybe it's a new lamp. Maybe it's a yellow lamp. Maybe if we're past phrases, we might, again, depending on the cues, I might make up a sentence. I turn on the lamp. The child might make their own sentence up. But so again, that physical activity, and we get to drive and have fun. And then feed the puppet. My younger kids love anything to do with a puppet. Um, I've even not had room in a bag and I needed something small. And so I've even made a sock puppet before where I just drew some eyes on a big sock and I had my hand in there and it was a sock puppet. And sometimes the kids like to take turns. So I get to feed the sock puppet and they get to feed the sock puppet. So when I feed the sock puppet, I'm giving them great models. When they feed the sock puppet, I'm listening for them. And if they're depending on their level, I might just say, oh, what's he going to eat next? And maybe they get to pick it. Oh, bubbles. Or we might make a sentence. I have sometimes where I tell the kids, all right, tell them to eat bubbles. We might just be putting each time, eat bubbles, eat bubbles, eat bubbles. So those are always fun. Another one that some of my kids like to do is we turn the lights off in the room, maybe not make it super dark, but we turn the lights off. I've put some cards maybe on the walls or in an area, and taken a flashlight, I've taken my phone light, and we go hunting for the words and looking for them. And as soon as the light shines on a picture, we name it or we say a sentence or whatever's at their level. So again, that's kind of a fun way, especially brings in some movement. And
Karen,
then,
you have 5 more minutes until nine
okay,
o'clock. So.
all right. So this one's called Is It A? So I've had kids where they've had cards. They're looking at them and I make a guess. And also they might have one card held up. I'll say, is it a cat? And they might say, yes, it's a cat. So I'm working on a sentence or something. Otherwise, they might say, no, it's a. So again, it's just a quick, easy way to have some fun and be silly. And then you can see this picture of this other one is I'll lay my cards out, flip them upside down. I'll take a bean bag. I'll use I have lots of stuffed animals in my room, and we might throw the stuffed animal, and whatever the stuffed animal lands on, we pick that up and touch it. I'm just going to kind of go quickly so we're kind of towards the end, but sensory bins. This is something I fill with a variety of things. Right now I have one filled with some big fat straws, and I'll just hide pictures in there. The kids just like to pull things out. It's more fun than again, just sitting there naming a picture. What did you find? I've used objects, I've used pictures. We've done things like puzzles where every time they um, name three cards. We do one, two, three. They put a piece in the puzzle. One, two, three, piece in the puzzle. I've taken cups, glued or taped something to the bottom, and flipped them all upside down, and they get to take turns flipping them over and naming a picture. So again, it's just a different, these are all just different ways that you can look at the pictures and have a little more fun. Memory is common. These are, I'll have two of each kind, lay them out, and we take turns flipping two over. We're looking for matches. They have to name each one, and then it's my turn. And then Go Fish, where I give them five cards that we ask each other, like, do you have a doctor? If I have a doctor, I say yes, and I give it to them. If I don't, I tell them go fish, and they get to pick one from a pile of cards and look for it. So the kids enjoy that. I especially use this with some of my kids. I'm working on that F sound because each time we take a turn, they have to say go fish. And then I skipped right through it. Board games, any type of game that's turn taking. I have a whole bunch of games that sometimes the kids just get to pick a game, and we say 3 words each turn. They get to take a turn. 3 cards each turn, take a turn. I guess kind of these target strategies. These just kind of are some different approaches. A vertical strategy basically just means I'm just going to pick one or two of the speech sounds. I'm really going to target those. When they achieve those sounds. A horizontal strategy might be just working on lots of sounds for my kids with a lot of speech sound errors, and I'm doing it less intensely and I'm exposing them to a lot of those. Or I'm rotating through targets over periods. Maybe I'm working on this one for a while, and then we're going to table that and we're going to switch over here. So those are just some different ways, and that can be something we talk more about some other time, but I just want to kind of make home practice is really important. Again, we want siblings, teachers, grandparents involved. And then I get this question a lot. What about when I'm having a conversation with them and they produce a sound wrong? Should I correct them? And my answer is if they're not working on the conversational level, then no. So if I'm going to make a practice time at home, if I'm outside of practice time, the only thing I'm going to worry about is providing them some good models. And correct a child, say that, say that, do it again, do it again. They're not going to want to talk to us, and we still want them to be kids. We still want them to play. We still want them to have fun. And so I would not correct a child in these other situations. I would keep it to practice time. So now, if I heard them making several sound errors, I might even make notes of the special words and that I heard them errors and use those in a practice time. So one other thing I just want to also, one of the last things I want to point out is people ask me about some oral motor exercises. So these would be things like moving your tongue around and, blowing and there's, things to your cheeks, things to your lips. So what the research shows is that these are considered non-speech because I'm just moving my tongue, moving my lips, that these are not effective for improving speech production. So our ability to motorically move our lips, push our lips together, blow air, that is a separate part of the brain from the I'm producing speech. So I, unless there have been times that I have done something with someone that um, basically wasn't able, had some structural issues, and they had a very difficult time moving their tongue even. But you do not need a lot of, to produce a T or a D, you do not need a lot of strength to produce our speech sounds. So that is not something that I often would target in and just the most effective thing is going to actually use speech sounds, not things that are non-speech. So this is the last one. This just has two resources. At some point, I'm going to give you even more, but that mommy speech therapy where I showed you the assessment, that was free. She also has a lot of examples that you can download of every speech sound. Again, obviously these are all in English, but it also might give examples of, oh, I could make a sheet like that. I'm going to put together some pictures, some words. And then another website also that has free articulation worksheets. So both of these are great places I use often. So I know that was a lot of information. I keep saying that. I'm trying to give you as much as possible without being too much, but I'm happy to answer more questions about anything in here.
So this is the time for anyone who wants to ask any questions. You're welcome either to open your cameras or to write them in the chat box. I have a question in the meantime, Karen. I wanted to know if what is your advice for someone who has a low budget for materials? You showed a lot of different types of materials. There were some that were very, very creative, and I was kind of wondering what you would focus on if your budget is low and don't have a lot of ability to buy or to create so many different products. Karen? Karen, are you here? Okay, we might have lost her. Um, Interesting. One second. I'm checking if she's here. No, I think we lost her. So she might reconnect in a few minutes and I'll let her in. So in the meantime, I see I'm admitting her again. I'm sorry for the delay. If anyone here has to go, as I said, this is being recorded, so you're welcome to see the end once this goes up to YouTube.
Technical
Karen, are you
difficulties.
back?
I am tech. I guess it just all of a sudden just signed me out.
Okay, sorry for that. Um, I had a question. What was your advice for people with low budget in terms of materials? Meaning,
Yeah.
what would your focus?
So I've done therapy without materials. Again, there might be objects, but sometimes even I've had parents that I've given them some certain words that I know, hey, they're going to see these out on a walk. Like I could go outside and see these things. Or I might just have, so again, we can still have fun without having, stuffed animals and cards and balls and that kind of thing. I've even taken, one other activity I've done is taken a ball, and I've kind of attached some different pictures to it, and we've played catch, and whatever picture is facing me, they say. So, in general, hopefully if it's something where, someone might at least be able to have some sort of pictures printed out. But from there, we've even saved like bottle caps from tops of bottles. And I might even have a picture, several pictures, and just each time we save them, we put a bottle cap on there and we try to get to 10. So it's a lot of times it's just about doing something else besides having some sort of drill where the only thing the child is doing is, um, drill work saying a word.
Okay, great. Is there anyone else here that wants to ask a question?
And one thing that's definitely in my idea of things I want to do is be able to get more information about what are the range of things that parents do have at home? What are the range of things that might be seen at schools, or what some different things that people would have access to? Again, if it's just bottle caps, or something like that, then being able to put together some activities and ideas specific to those things. So I think that will definitely be helpful in the future because obviously everybody doesn't have certain materials or budgets or ability to do and have certain things. We want to make sure we're giving everybody the information they need to make progress.
Okay. So I think that's it. So first of all, I want to thank you again for everything you're doing and everything you're teaching us. And you really get to see a part of you also how creative you are with all these materials and these thoughts that you're teaching. So thank you very much for that. And I want to remind you all that next week is our last session with Karen, so don't miss out. I know I'm
For
enjoying this
now,
much.
not
For
last
now,
session,
that's true.
forever.
Next week, we'll also let you know how we're continuing this, since as you keep saying, there's so much to learn and not enough time. So we'll talk about this more next week. I want to remind you all that people who were here tonight that didn't sign up through the link, please let me know. You could either write your email now in the chat box or contact us through the email, eye to eye, so we can have you in our contact and make sure that you become on our list. Second of all, I put a link here to the questionnaire. I also sent it to you in the email, so whoever filled it out through here, you don't have to do it as well through the email. And wanted to let you know that this time I also sent you all already the presentation, so whoever wants to use it, go over it, you're more than welcome. And we hope to see you all next week. Karen, anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, I don't think so. Look forward to seeing you for our next one on our kids with augmentative and alternative communication and our kids that aren't using words to speak, what we can do with them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good night, and Karen, have a good day.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye bye.